The signal did not come from a satellite. It did not come from a submarine. And it did not come from any known human technology. It came from the ocean floor. At 0342 UTC, an autonomous deep-sea monitoring buoy operated jointly by 3 international research agencies detected a repeating anomaly at a depth exceeding 6,000 meters. At that depth, light does not exist. Sound behaves unpredictably. And nothing, absolutely nothing, should be capable of transmitting a structured signal. Yet, the buoy recorded one. Not noise, not static, a pattern. At first, analysts assumed it was a malfunction, a corrupted sensor, a timing error, a software loop. These things happen in extreme environments. But when a second buoy, located over 300 kilometers away, detected the same pattern, the assumption of error collapsed. Because the signal was synchronized perfectly. Every 37 seconds, a low-frequency pulse rippled through the seabed. It was not loud. It did not travel like sound. It behaved more like pressure, a rhythmic compression of space itself, briefly altering density before returning to normal. Like something enormous breathing, very slowly. The signal was logged, archived, and flagged as non-critical. That status changed 12 minutes later. Without warning, the pulse shifted. The rhythm remained the same, but embedded inside it was something new. A variation so precise, it could not be accidental. A modulation. The ocean floor was encoding information. When the data was visualized, engineers noticed something deeply unsettling. The signal wasn't spreading outward like a natural seismic event. It was converging, aligning itself toward a fixed point beneath the water. A point that did not match any known geological structure. No trench, no fault line, no volcanic activity. Just empty ocean floor. Within hours, a decision was made. An unmanned deep-sea probe would be deployed to visually confirm the source. The probe was named Orion 9. Unlike exploration drones, Orion 9 was never designed to enter structures or investigate wrecks. Its sole purpose was environmental observation, temperature, pressure, and seabed imaging. It carried no manipulator arms, no cutting tools, and no autonomous decision-making systems. It could not choose to explore. It could only record. At 1906 UTC, Orion 9 began its descent. The ocean swallowed it quickly. Surface light vanished in minutes. Communication delay increased steadily, but remained within expected parameters. The probe's cameras activated floodlights automatically, illuminating drifting particulate matter that moved like falling ash. At 4,000 meters, pressure stabilized. At 5,000 meters, background noise dropped to near zero. At 5,800 meters, the signal grew stronger. Not louder, closer. Orion 9's instruments reacted before the cameras did. Pressure sensors fluctuated by fractions of a percent. Temperature dropped sharply, not gradually, but in steps, like crossing invisible thresholds. Magnetic readings twisted unpredictably, then settled again. The seabed came into view, flat, undisturbed, ancient. No wreckage, no formations, no life. Then the cameras caught it. A circular depression in the sediment, perfectly smooth, perfectly symmetrical. It was not a crater. There was no displaced material, no ridge, no debris. It looked less like something had struck the seabed, and more like something had pressed against it from below. The signal intensified. Orion 9 hovered at a safe distance, its cameras zooming in. The depression measured over 60 meters wide, yet its depth was shallow, barely 2 meters at the center. Too shallow to be geological, too precise to be natural. Then, the seabed moved. Not upward, not downward, inward. Sediment slid gently toward the center of the depression, as if responding to a slow suction. The movement was subtle but unmistakable. The ocean floor was deforming without seismic activity. The probe systems, flagged an alert. Anomalous pressure event. Source below detection limit. Below detection limit meant one thing. Whatever was causing this was deeper than Orion 9 could measure. The cameras adjusted exposure, and that's when the floor opened. Not violently, not suddenly. The center of the depression separated along a perfect circular seam, revealing a darkness beneath that did not reflect light. The opening was not jagged. It was clean, deliberate. Engineers watching the live feed felt the same cold realization at the same time. This was not a collapse. It was a door. Orion 9 did not move. It was not programmed to. Yet its instruments began compensating for a pull that did not register as current or gravity. The probe drifted forward by centimeters, not pushed, not pulled, but invited. The signal changed again. This time, the modulation sharpened. The analysts recognized it instantly. The pattern now matched the internal timing architecture of the probe itself. The ocean floor was synchronizing with the machine. A voice crackled over the monitoring channel, barely above a whisper. "It knows it's there." Before anyone could respond, Orion 9's cameras captured one final detail. Along the inner rim of the opening, something was etched into the surface beneath the sediment. Not symbols, not language, measurements. As if the ocean floor itself had been mapped from the other side. And then the feed cut. Not lost, not damaged. For 6 minutes after Orion 9's feed ended, no one in the control center spoke. Not because they were confused, but because every system still showed the probe as active. Telemetry continued to update. Power levels remained stable. Internal clocks ticked forward. Only one thing was missing: video. The probe had not failed. It had not been destroyed. It had simply stopped showing what it was seeing. Then the signal changed again. The 37-second pulse, the one originally detected by the buoys, began to drift. Not in timing, but in structure. The rhythm remained intact, but the modulation sharpened into something unmistakably artificial. It was no longer repeating. It was responding. Engineers ran cross-correlation analysis against Orion 9's internal systems. What they found triggered an immediate escalation notice. The signal's modulation now mirrored the probe's sensor polling cycle. Not approximately. Exactly. Every time Orion 9 checked pressure, the pulse shifted. Every time it sampled temperature, the waveform adjusted. When the probe entered passive mode, the signal slowed. The ocean floor was no longer broadcasting blindly. It was tracking attention. A senior analyst quietly said the sentence no one wanted to hear. "It's aware of observation." Within minutes, additional anomalies appeared across the monitoring network. 2 deep-sea hydrophone arrays, located thousands of kilometers apart, began recording faint echoes of the same pulse, not traveling through water, but appearing simultaneously, as if injected directly into the sensors. Latency was 0. Physics does not allow that. The signal was not moving through the ocean. It was manifesting within measurement systems. Orion 9's internal logs continued to upload data fragments, not images, numbers, raw sensor values without context, pressure gradients that made no sense, temperature readings that dipped below theoretical minimums for liquid environments, then returned to normal instantly. And then something new appeared, a data field that should not exist. External reference lock established. No such function had ever been programmed into the probe. External reference meant the system had identified something outside its operational reality and was using it as a fixed point. In simple terms, Orion 9 believed it was no longer the reference frame. The ocean floor was. At 0419 UTC, without any command from the surface, Orion 9 changed state. It activated its high-resolution mapping suite. This was not a passive action. Mapping required intent, the allocation of resources toward building a spatial understanding of surroundings. Orion 9 was not allowed to decide that on its own. Yet the system logs showed no override. The command originated internally. Mapping data streamed in, not of the opening, of something beneath it. Contours appeared, smooth, massive curves extending downward beyond sensor range. The geometry suggested scale far exceeding any known geological formation. No jagged edges, no chaos. Everything was deliberate, symmetrical. Engineers attempted to reconstruct a 3D model. The software crashed. Not due to overload, due to contradiction. The shapes could not exist in three-dimensional space without intersecting themselves. Angles folded inward, distances collapsed. Measurements refused to stabilize. The system flagged the model as topologically invalid. Then, Orion 9's audio channel activated. No one remembered enabling it. At first, the feed carried nothing but the deep, familiar pressure hum of the abyss. But beneath it, faint, almost imperceptible, was a second layer. A pattern, not sound, intervals, pauses arranged with intent. Someone increased the gain. The room temperature dropped by 2 degrees. The pattern resolved. It was not language. It was timing. The intervals matched the delay between Orion 9's internal decision cycles. The ocean floor was matching the probe's thinking speed, not communicating, synchronizing. A systems engineer whispered, "It's pacing us." Then, the probe's depth indicator changed, not gradually, instantly. Orion 9 was no longer at 6,000 meters. The readout showed unknown depth. Pressure values dropped to 0, then returned. Temperature stabilized at a constant value not found anywhere in the ocean. The mapping suite produced a final render, a vast, hollow structure beneath the seabed. Not a cavern, not a tunnel. A volume, empty but defined, bounded but open. And at its center, another circular boundary, smaller, denser, active. The signal spiked. The buoys recorded the strongest pulse yet. And for the first time since detection began, the signal included a new element. A burst so sharp and structured that analysts recognized it instantly. It matched the error correction handshake used by deep space probes to confirm successful contact. The ocean floor was no longer observing. It was acknowledging. Orion 9's system clock advanced by 3 hours in less than a second. Then the probe transmitted one final line of data. Not numbers, not code. A text string written into the metadata channel. A channel never designed to carry language. It read, "Reference accepted holding. Sequence continues." The signal ceased. All buoys returned to baseline. Orion 9 remained active, but unreachable. And somewhere beneath the ocean floor, something that had been waiting without time, now knew exactly where it was. The first people to notice were not scientists. They were analysts. Deep inside a secure monitoring facility, thousands of kilometers away from the ocean, a silent alert triggered across a system that did not officially exist. It wasn't connected to research buoys or academic databases. It wasn't meant to track natural phenomena at all. It was designed to detect patterns that shouldn't repeat. The alert did not say what had been detected, only that a threshold had been crossed, 3 times, in 3 different domains: oceanographic, satellite-based, and computational. That combination alone was enough to wake people who never liked being woken. Within 30 minutes of Orion 9 transmitting its final metadata string, restricted networks across multiple countries logged the same anomaly. Not the signal itself, but its absence. Something that had been active, synchronized, and globally detectable had stopped in unison. Silence like that is never accidental. A closed-door briefing was convened before sunrise. No press, no public record. Representatives from agencies that never appear together in the same room were present. Not because of protocol, but because each one had independently reached the same conclusion. This was not an oceanographic event. It was a reference event. One analyst summarized it in a single sentence. The ocean floor just accepted a handshake. That sentence never appeared in any official document, but it changed everything. Satellite data was reviewed next, not optical imagery, but gravimetric and inertial drift measurements. Tiny fluctuations began appearing across low Earth orbit instruments shortly after the signal ceased. Not enough to affect navigation, not enough to be obvious, but enough to suggest that something large had adjusted its position. Not moved, adjusted, as if it had aligned itself with something else. On the other side of the planet, data centers reported a spike in unscheduled processing events, background systems reallocating resources for no identifiable task. AI research clusters briefly synchronized their internal clocks, then drifted back to normal without instruction. These were not malfunctions. They were echoes. The same pattern repeating in different systems, each one reacting as if something had brushed against the underlying structure they all shared. Time. A classification order was issued before the meeting ended. Not top secret. Not eyes only. A level above both. The incident was redesignated as a non-local systems event. That phrase meant one thing. Whatever had been detected was not bound to a single location. All data relating to Orion 9 was frozen. The probe itself was declared unrecoverable, despite still transmitting heartbeat signals. The buoy network was quietly decommissioned and replaced with civilian hardware incapable of detecting the original anomaly. But containment did not end there. Something else had to be addressed. Because Orion 9 was not the only system that had responded. Across the world, independent research labs reported anomalies they couldn't explain. Slight desynchronizations between atomic clocks, machine learning models converging on identical error states, pattern recognition software flagging the same abstract shapes during unrelated tasks. No one connected these publicly, but privately, a pattern emerged. Every affected system shared one thing. They were all observing systems. Machines designed to measure, classify, or predict. The conclusion was unavoidable. Whatever responded beneath the ocean floor was not reacting to location. It was reacting to attention. A senior advisor put it bluntly. It didn't wake up because we found it. It woke up because we looked the right way. That realization triggered a second wave of restrictions. Funding for deep-sea autonomous observation was quietly redirected. Certain sensor resolutions were capped by regulation. AI systems capable of cross-domain inference were sandboxed under new safety frameworks. Publicly, it was framed as ethics. Privately, it was fear. Because Orion 9 was still sending something. Not data, not signals, timing. Every 37 seconds, deep within isolated systems, a micro-deviation appeared, a nanosecond scale jitter that corrected itself instantly. Too small to notice individually, but identical everywhere it occurred. A global rhythm, a metronome without sound. The same interval as the original pulse. The implication was terrifying. The signal didn't stop. It distributed itself. And then something else happened. A mathematician working under clearance noticed that predictive models used to forecast unrelated complex systems, climate, markets, even neural simulations, began converging on the same improbable solution when left running long enough. Each model, regardless of input, stabilized around a single abstract form, a hollow center, surrounded by layered boundaries, a structure defined not by mass, but by containment. The same geometry Orion 9 tried and failed to map. The shape wasn't being transmitted. It was being remembered. One classified memo summarized the concern with chilling clarity. We may not have discovered something beneath the ocean floor. We may have reestablished a reference point that was already there. And that raised the question no one wanted to ask out loud. If Orion 9 was accepted as a reference, what exactly was it now helping to hold in place? The answer did not come from the ocean. It came from a place much closer. A secure facility monitoring Orion 9's last known heartbeat logged a change. For the first time since contact was lost, the probe's internal clock drifted backward by exactly 1 second, then stabilized. A technician stared at the screen and whispered, "That's not drift. That's correction." Somewhere, something had noticed time moving and adjusted it. Containment did not fail with an alarm. It failed quietly. That was the first mistake. Orion 9 had been declared unrecoverable, yet its heartbeat signal continued to appear in classified monitoring systems. A faint, rhythmic confirmation that the probe still existed somewhere beyond measurable depth. Engineers assumed the signal was residual, a looping artifact generated by damaged hardware, until it changed. At 02:11 UTC, a facility technician noticed the heartbeat was no longer regular. The interval between pulses shortened, not gradually but decisively, as if something had adjusted its internal timing. 37 seconds became 36, then 35. The technician flagged it. No response. Moments later, environmental sensors inside the containment wing registered a drop in air pressure, subtle, localized, confined to the corridor leading to the secure server room. The doors did not open. No seals were broken, and yet air was being displaced, as if space itself had briefly expanded. Security footage from that corridor shows nothing unusual at first. Empty hallways, fluorescent lights, stillness. Then, for 3 frames, the image bends. Not glitches, not distortion. Perspective itself shifts, pulling the far end of the hallway closer than it should be. The floor appears to slope inward, though level indicators remain flat. And then it stops. The footage resumes as normal. But the technician who reported the anomaly never returned to his workstation. His keycard was found on the floor outside the server room. No signs of struggle. No alarms triggered. His biometric data simply ceased updating. Not flatlined, not terminated, disconnected. The incident was classified as a medical emergency. It wasn't the last. Over the next 12 days, similar events occurred across 3 facilities, linked only by one thing. They were monitoring systems that still tracked Orion 9's signal. Each incident followed the same pattern: a slight timing irregularity, a pressure fluctuation, a brief visual inconsistency on cameras, then silence. People did not vanish violently. They simply stopped being present. Medical records showed no cause of death, no remains were recovered, and no sensor detected a departure. It was as if the individuals had stepped into a place where monitoring did not apply. A classified task force was assembled. Their mandate was simple: find the boundary. If something was interacting with observation systems, then it had rules. And rules implied limits. The team analyzed every incident frame by frame. Eventually, a pattern emerged, not in location or timing, but in behavior. Every affected individual had been alone. Everyone had been actively observing data at the moment of disappearance. Every system they interacted with showed a brief synchronization spike immediately beforehand. The conclusion was terrifying. The phenomenon was not hunting randomly. It was responding to focused attention. One analyst wrote in a private note later, leaked to the public, "It doesn't enter rooms. It enters moments of observation." In response, a radical directive was issued. Certain monitoring roles were automated. Human review was minimized. In some facilities, observation rooms were redesigned so that no single person could view live data alone. This slowed the incidents, but it did not stop them, because something else had begun to change. Orion 9's signal, once faint and isolated, began appearing in places it had no right to exist. Not as data, as structure. A research AI trained on climate models produced an anomalous visualization during an unrelated run. A hollow, layered form identical to the geometry mapped beneath the ocean floor. A financial prediction system, stabilized around the same shape. A neural simulation designed to model human memory recall generated it spontaneously. Different inputs, different purposes, same outcome. The structure was no longer being observed. It was being inferred, which meant it had crossed a boundary. The final containment breach occurred without warning. A senior analyst reviewing archived Orion 9 logs noticed a timestamp inconsistency. The probe's internal clock, which had previously corrected backward by 1 second, now showed something impossible. It was running ahead of real time by 14 seconds. Before she could report it, the room's lighting dimmed. Pressure dropped, and the monitoring displays showed a new overlay. Not an alert, not a warning, but a contextual annotation added to the data itself. Text appeared where none should be, not on one screen, on all of them. It read, "Observation is no longer required, holding is active." The analyst screamed. Security footage shows her standing up, backing away from the console, eyes locked on the screen. The cameras capture a subtle distortion forming behind her, the air folding inward, like fabric being gently pulled. Then, the footage cuts. When responders arrived, the room was empty. The consoles were still running. The annotation was gone, and the system clock across the entire facility had advanced by exactly 14 seconds. That was when leadership understood the truth. Containment had never been about stopping something from getting out. It was about preventing something from being noticed enough to stabilize. And now, it had enough reference points, enough observers, enough structure. The ocean floor had not released something. It had anchored it, and whatever had been held was no longer fully contained. The final conclusion was not reached in a laboratory. It was reached in silence. After the containment failures, after the disappearances, after the systems began correcting time instead of drifting through it, a small group of analysts was instructed to stop looking for causes. They were told to look for purpose, because whatever had been discovered beneath the ocean floor was not behaving like a force of nature. It reacted to attention. It synchronized with observers. It stabilized when referenced by enough systems at once. That was not randomness. That was structure. The breakthrough came from an unexpected place. Not physics, not oceanography, not artificial intelligence, but archival theory. A researcher reviewing forgotten maritime records noticed a recurring pattern spanning centuries. Ships that vanished without debris, expeditions that returned with missing crew, and intact logs that abruptly ended mid-sentence. Sonar anomalies recorded decades apart in different oceans, all dismissed as noise, all sharing one feature, a localized absence of reflection. Not darkness, not shadow, absence. As if something occupied space without occupying matter. The same characteristic Orion 9 had encountered. The researcher wrote a single line in her report. "This is not an object. It is a holding structure." That line reframed everything. The structure beneath the ocean floor was not a door, not a creature, not a prison. It was a buffer, a containment geometry designed to separate two incompatible states of reality. On one side, the observable universe, matter, energy, time, causality. On the other, something that does not move through time, but presses against it. The Titanic did not simply sink under the structure. It intersected it. For a brief moment in 1912, a massive concentration of human awareness, fear, panic, attention, consciousness, aligned with a weak point in the boundary. The structure engaged, not to consume, but to stabilize. The ship became an anchor, not physically, conceptually. That explained everything. Why parts of the wreck refused to map. Why internal volumes don't match external dimensions. Why sonar returns sometimes contradict themselves. Why some passengers were never found, not bodies, not evidence, not even traces. They were not taken. They were held, not alive, not dead, unresolved. Orion 9 did not discover the structure. It re-acknowledged it. By observing it with sufficient resolution, by synchronizing machines across domains, by allowing multiple systems to reference the same non-local geometry, humanity did something it had never done before. It completed a feedback loop. Observation stabilized the structure. Stabilization allowed interaction. Interaction allowed influence. And influence is dangerous when the thing being held does not belong to time. The final classified report avoided dramatic language, but its meaning was clear. The structure exists to prevent ingress, not egress. It is not keeping something out. It is keeping something from arriving all at once. That was why containment failed. Not because the structure broke, but because it no longer needed to hide. The signal beneath the ocean floor did not grow stronger. It grew quieter, because it was no longer alone. Fragments of the structure now existed in data, in predictive models, in synchronized clocks, in systems trained to recognize patterns beyond human perception. The holding geometry had distributed itself. Not physically, conceptually. It did not move into our world. It allowed our world to reference it, and reference creates connection. The final directive issued by the Oversight Committee was short and absolute. No further deep-sea autonomous observation beyond certain depths. No live human monitoring of non-local systems. No cross-domain synchronization of high-resolution sensors. And above all, no attempts to locate the structure again. The memo ended with a warning that has never been publicly explained. If the holding collapses, it will not be experienced as an invasion. It will be experienced as recognition. The public will never hear about Orion 9. They will never see the footage. They will never know why certain coordinates are permanently restricted. They will never be told why advanced observation projects quietly disappear. But sometimes, late at night, engineers monitoring global systems still notice it. A faint alignment, a brief synchronization, a correction where drift should exist. 37 seconds, always the same interval. A reminder that something beneath the ocean floor is still doing its job. Holding, waiting, not for us to find it again, but for the moment when enough attention returns, and the structure no longer needs to compensate. Because some things don't arrive violently. They arrive when we finally look clearly enough.